Hi, welcome to Sage Health TV, a weekly show where we give you tips on optimizing your health and wellness. So please like, follow, and subscribe below so you don't miss an episode. Today, we're going to be talking about, now that we're in 2019, it's a brand new year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, yes. We have 5 areas that we'd like to review with you on about how to basically look at optimizing your health this year. And going beyond the basics of what most people do, in their prevention visits, or if they're just looking at, say, going and being well.
And one thing that we've got into a lot in our various shows is how to dig deeper, how to get to that next level of achieving that optimal health. So that's really what we want to talk to you about today, is how we can help you dig deeper.
Yes,
to achieve those health goals.
And in these areas, what you're thinking about, this can be relevant for you even, if you're feeling good, but maybe you have some family history risk there, or have had past experiences with certain types of risks, maybe a heart attack or a stroke or other areas, autoimmune. Or if you are currently experiencing those things and you haven't if you haven't dove into these areas yet, they could be really like those next steps to kind of making your health look like you'd like it to look like, So our first area is weight. So probably at this point, everybody is, geared up to really look at this area. Maybe not, but it is so crucial. It's so crucial to your overall health, your overall long-term wellness and your prevention of risk. And that relates to prevention of risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, autoimmune. It really ties into almost every chronic illness.
Yeah. And when we talk about weight, we're not talking about, that ideal image of what like our body's supposed to look like, but we're talking about, just overall like body composition. And if, you're at a place where the excess weight is actually a risk factor, because excess body fat can actually be really, really pro-inflammatory, and that can affect your entire body, including your brain.
Exactly. So, we're talking about a healthy weight, or a place where you feel really comfortable and happy in your body. And this doesn't always relate to the BMI. Sometimes that can be a useful tool, but there are people who big boned or they have a lot of muscle. They're not going to fall into what's supposed to be like an ideal BMI category. So what I'd like to just mention today are your tools. So there are guides for weight loss everywhere these days. We certainly can do it for you, but I just wanted to review a few different styles of approaches of diets. So first one that's become, I think, extremely popular, it's super hot, is the ketogenic diet. And that's where you're mostly doing fat with a little bit of protein and almost no carbs. And what it does is puts your body into a state of fat burning mode, actually, but it's really fantastic for the brain. Actually, long term, they've seen reduced risk of cancer. And most people do really, really well. Like they burn fat really well.
And once again, it's really anti-inflammatory.
Right.
So it's a great way also to get systemic pain in check, and also get some, the brain firing.
Exactly.
Really well.
All that healthy fat. And again, it's healthy fat is the key, not, McDonald's cheeseburgers. Just have to say that. So, so the next would be we use a version of that is considered a low calorie weight loss diet, which is HCG. That also puts you into ketosis and is very effective at burning fat as well. Then we get into more like the paleo style diets. And so how that differs is you're definitely going whole foods. You're taking carbs, you're only doing the most complex carbs, and sugar, alcohol, all of those things are gone during that time. And that's there's a really popular version
out there.
And grains
are just
exactly
out.
Yes, those carbs and refined sugars are all gone. So Whole30 is kind of a modified version of that, and they have some specific things that they do. And there are other versions that are popular.
And the information on this is really, it's out there in so many places, but what I find with patients is that they come in and they still feel just a little bit overwhelmed. overwhelmed. Like, how do I start?
Right.
Which one's right for me? They still want,
Yeah.
that support to just kind of like walk them through this first few days and just get the sense of like, one, they're coming in with some baseline labs and some idea of like what areas they need to work on, not just the weight.
Right.
And that also helps us to figure out which diet or even more dietary lifestyle is right.
Lifestyle change, right? Because there certainly are diets, there are cleanses that we do, there are detox programs, but then it's the after, right? What happens after you're done with that cleanse? What are you doing then? And that again, it is a lifestyle change. So, happy to guide you on that and talk through with you, an option that might be good for you or best for you. So then we get into looking at brain health for 2019, and it's a huge area. So we're going to try to dial it down about things that are very specifically that you might want to consider.
Yeah, and brain health is an area that we're planning to do a lot of work around, and some pieces on. Coming up in February, we'll do a whole series. So just to touch base on it a little bit is one, when we're talking about brain health. As a lot of us are aging, or we have aging parents, we're seeing more and more things. I mean, it's just an epidemic of things like dementia and Alzheimer's and other areas of cognitive dysfunction that have really come to the forefront. And it's like looking at that from two areas. One, what can we look at currently that we need to change if those problems are already showing up, and what can we do preventatively, even if they're not, whether there's a family history, or how can we identify personal markers for people that might show, hey, you may have more of a propensity genetically or based on other things to have these problems. What can we do now?
Right.
And
that could be also, I know that what we like to use a lot if there are symptoms already, or brain neurotransmitter testing, like looking at exact levels, and then also identifying possible deficiencies related to other brain nutrients, like, the oils, again, coming back to fats.
They're so important.
So important, right.
And markers of inflammation. So Alzheimer's is really considered, it's often, referred to as type 3 diabetes. So when we're looking at diet, but we're also looking at sugar metabolism, and why do some people metabolize sugar differently, and how does that affect the brain? So we can measure markers of inflammation. We can look at people's, dietary choices. Certainly, some people are more likely to develop. And then also looking at current practices that are really affecting the brain. So many medications that are used really widespread actually have very significant negative cognitive effects. In fact, last year, JAMA published a study that looked at 150,000 women. It was a huge study. And women on certain statins actually had a 70% increased risk of developing diabetes, and a small subset of that, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So there's one medication. They've also, the research shows that PPIs, things like omeprazole and Prilosec, also increase the risk of dementia.
Your acid blockers.
Yep,
right?
Acid blockers, and so many people are on that. So now we're looking at gut health connected.
Yeah.
So that's another huge area. And then long-term use of benzodiazepines are also shown to increase the risk of Alzheimer's.
Right.
So we want to talk to people about like, well, what are you currently doing that can be shifted, where we can help you find alternatives, to get you off of things that might cause brain problems down the road. And then also, when we're talking about brain health, we're also talking about mood. So depression, anxiety, once again, brings us back to those neurotransmitters. Like, how can we look at supporting, optimizing those? Right.
So, say this year, this could be the year that, if you tend to experience anxiety, depression, or you have, strong family risk of Alzheimer's, this is your get in, let's get that testing done. Let's get that genetic testing done, which we'll talk about here in a second. But coming back to what you said around food and the brain, so key. And that's our third area of that we really like. If this is something that you haven't explored yet, people really don't like to think about this, but almost everyone has a food intolerance.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone, unless you have the most perfect diet and no stress and no weird exposures. That's not going to happen. So this is such an important area that if you haven't explored this, definitely put it on your list, because as Dr. Anastasia was saying, they now think that over 80% of your brain neurotransmitters are made in your intestines. And so there is a direct correlation. I definitely have seen it where somebody takes out dairy, brings it back in, and has complete meltdown, emotional meltdown. I've seen that a lot of times, actually, and not just dairy, right?
And and gluten's a big one for brain fog. And now these are things too. We can test for these. We can test for food allergies or sensitivities, or intolerances. But I also like to say that with some of these, whether they come back negative or positive, there are certain things in this, the standard American diet that are just across the board pro-inflammatory and not good for the brain, right? And so,
for the body.
Dr. David Perlmutter, who's an amazing integrative neurologist, talks a lot about. He has a book called Grain Brain, and he talks about I'm back to the brain, but talking about food, where 70% of the reaction that comes from gluten is extraintestinal, meaning it's showing up in symptoms outside of the GI tract, and that just removing that can do so much.
Can clear.
So we can definitely test, but we can also talk to people about how to do a really effective elimination diet to evaluate for symptoms and other markers. So there's several ways to go about it.
And for some people, I found that it really does. You can certainly do elimination. I love that. That's probably the gold standard. But sometimes it really helps to see it in black and white. You see it, that was super high level. It's like, okay.
Oh, for sure. And sometimes that's all people need. And they're like, wow, eggs are off the chart. Or I don't want to pick on one certain food. But for example, a lot of people don't come back with that much of a blip on sugar. And they're like, well, sugar's fine. And it's like, sugar across the board probably isn't great for
inflammatory,
you, even if it says you're not allergic. But they're really valuable. I've had patients that come back through the roof on like all the dairy, and they're like, well, I don't have that much dairy. And then we talk about it, and it's like every meal. And then they get it out, and it's like, oh my God, my psoriasis went away, and my joint pain went away. And there's no way to know without, doing that elimination.
Right, exactly. So which it doesn't quite lead to our next area, but we've already talked about genetic testing. So this is kind of, can be a little bit of an intimidating area for people. Because it's for a lot of people, and especially even in the medical community, talking about genetics, while it's becoming more prevalent, it's still such it's an enormous area, and it's so specialized. And there are areas. The cool thing about it is that there are tests that we can do, your genetic testing, that actually just with helps us understand, like make a few small changes, and your health risk goes way down, and your ability to have energy and to also have better mood, things like that, much, much better. And so the things, I'm going to give you a couple that I really like to look at, or we like to look at. One would be MTHFR, and we've talked about that. We have an interview with Dr. Lori Marty, who's a genetic specialist. COMT is another. Both of these are brain health, cardiovascular risk, and looking actually at hormone balance and risk for hormone-related issues as well.
And then ApoE is really an important one when we're looking at Alzheimer's risk and how our body, and cardiovascular risk overall in terms of fat metabolism. And and this is a case where knowledge is power. Right? Instead of being like, oh God, I have this, I'm screwed. It's like, no, we see this, and now we can, that whole field of like nutrigenomics or epigenetics, where you're like, okay, we can do this, we can encourage you to do this, not to turn it on, or help you do this to kind of calm it down.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's great info.
Oh, it's great information. And the other, what you were talking about, statins, I'm so glad you brought up that study, because they're actually genetic markers that will look at if you are higher risk of having intolerance to those statins. And so, you don't have to do the long term of statin use, and get those tests done. Let's see, at a base level, how your body is going to respond.
It's a good thing to know, because sometimes this subset of people who have this genetic mutation can take statins and get irreversible. Irreversible damage to their muscles, including their cardiac muscles. So to know in advance, just in case the statin might be, something that your doctor wants to try with you, at least to have that
pretty
knowledge.
Common. Yeah. Right, so. Exactly. Yeah. And these tests can be easily done. There's actually there's a lot cheaper ways to do them these days, and genetic specialty companies. So definitely
and
contact us.
23andMe is still an option. It's something that you can get the raw data and run it through through a great program that will kind of lay it out and then bring it in, and we'll go through it for you.
Right.
So
exactly.
So there's a lot of options that are accessible.
Right. So, which brings us to our fifth area, and this is this area is also huge. But we really want to bring it up because it's so important for everyone's long-term health, and that's environmental toxin exposure. And unfortunately, we live in a world that uses a lot of chemicals, and there's a lot of heavy metal exposure. Just for instance, like because of the old copper smelter up in the Everett area. If anybody's watching this outside of the Seattle area, that's just kind of north of Seattle, that area has the highest level of lead and arsenic in the tri-state area. So that's Oregon, Washington,
in the soil,
and Idaho, in the soil and the water. That's huge, So we see a lot of people that have grown up around that, and so they're risk for those things. I think everybody's heard of lead and arsenic, that they're not good for you.
And once again, we're all exposed to things.
Yes.
Certainly some of us more than others if we live in certain areas, or if we have occupational exposures. But also, some people just don't detoxify as well. So two people can have that same overall exposure, and one person can have a much more elevated total body burden of these toxins because either for genetic reasons or, several other factors, lifestyle, genetics, all of this, they haven't been able to... haven't been able to detoxify those, and those can start to lead to health problems. And it's interesting because people come in, and we've talked about this in other shows where we're looking at things like autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's, other
fibromyalgia,
musculoskeletal or pain syndromes where people are doing these things, but they're just not quite getting to that next level. And this environmental toxins that are stored in the body can really be an obstacle to cure, and they need to be, find gentle ways to remove them. And we can test for those.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what we try to do is, as Dr. Anastasia is saying, measure them, create a program that works for you, because some people we do a little stronger, some people it's a little more gentle.
So if you've had dental amalgams, mercury fillings, even if they've been removed, I've had people who had them removed 10 years ago, but their body's still storing it. Or another big one, people who've had a lot of MRIs and procedures and are not clearing the gadolinium. That's a heavy metal, and I've had also people who are starting to have kidney function issues and stuff that are high in that. So if these are areas that may have been... that sound like something that you may have been exposed to or might be struggling with, that's also something we can look at.
Yeah. So again, maybe this year isn't the year to do all of these things.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Find the one that one or two that resonates, with you based on, again, what you're experiencing now, what your health goals are, what your family history looks like. But these are all, we'd love to work with you. What we do for our people is we create a plan around each of these and then guide you based on kind of, again, what we see, what comes back, and also the things that you're struggling with, So thank you so much for joining us today. Hope
remember to share.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, and we hope you have a wonderful beginning to 2019, and we look forward to seeing you more.
See you soon.